With the internal misconduct, Daniel Touche created a report that shows that $2.68 billion has been spent or is deemed to be spent for internal misconduct within the RCMP. You know, people think we talk about conspiracy theories. If only they knew what really was going on in the organization, they would be horrified.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Breaking Barriers Together is a group of former RCMP officers, public service employees, and we're all retired from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. We have made a group because we believe strongly in making the RCMP better. We believe there's 4 areas within Bill C-20 that need to be addressed. That Bill C-20 needs to include internal misconduct and what a clear definition of misconduct is. No RCMP members who are retired or serving or their family members should be involved in investigations of complaints by the Commission. The use of non-disclosure agreements should not be allowed through the Commission, and that all of the decisions the Commission make need to be binding. There needs to be some form to hold people accountable for what we feel needs to be done. Breaking Barriers believes that with Bill C-20, with the internal misconduct, Daniel Touche created a report that shows that $2.68 billion has been spent or is deemed to be spent for internal misconduct within the RCMP. Despite all of the promises that were made during the Merlot-Davidson settlement process, investigations still cause incredible harm to the victims. The process is fraught with personal bias, cultural bias, threats, and intimidation. We still need to remember it's the RCMP investigating the RCMP. We have to remember that hundreds of the complaints through the Merlot-Davidson lawsuit were actually originally investigated by the RCMP and were found to be unfounded. As soon as those complaints went to an independent investigation area, they found all of a sudden they were founded, which creates a lot of harm for the victims. The Honourable Michael Bastarav, the independent assessor for the group, came up with there were 3 key areas in discipline that he found was a problem. There was the perspective of bias, the unfairness of the process, and the likelihood of retaliation for making a complaint, and the lack of meaningful discipline or consequences for the officer's actions. We have heard from hundreds of serving RCMP officers today that this process is still taking place, and that is still the problem within the process. The problem with the RCMP is the culture, and that it is a toxic workplace. Bill C-20 has the ability to address that culture and to try and make it a better place to work. There are 130 of us identified in the Merlot-Davidson lawsuit who were actually victims of rape by other RCMP officers. Not one of those perpetrators, even though we have made criminal complaints, has ever come to justice for that. They retired with a pension, and there was no problems. We need to remember that Bill C-20 is supposed to make all Canadians equal, feel safe and fair treatment by the RCMP and by CBSA. So therefore, we need to allow internal misconduct to be part of that so that that part can be rectified. Secondly, we believe no RCMP officers or their families should ever be involved in having anything to do with if there is conduct problems within the RCMP. We need to remember they are part of the group. They have loyalties to the RCMP even though they're retired. So we need to make sure they are investigated by external organizations. We also need to remember non-disclosure agreements. The RCMP is famous for when there's a problem to make sure that they cover things up by using non-disclosure agreements. All that does is allow for the victim to be silenced, and the problem goes away and no one ever finds out about the problem. They need to be prohibited by the use of in Bill C-20 so that we can't hide those problems anymore. And the most important thing, we can say no RCMP members, we can say internal misconduct, we can say all of those things, but if we don't make the decisions that the commission comes to binding, then we will be in the same place where we are. We've had recommendation after recommendation made for 10, 15, 20 years that these are the problems and that's what needs to change. But until those decisions the commission come to are binding and actually force them to make a decision to follow the direction that is given to them, the problem will continue and it won't change. And then we're right back to where we started with.
I do have some questions of how we can address some of the things you've said, and I think that we're hearing commonality with others that have come forward. When we had the CBSA union, frontline union president, Mark Weber, come, he did mention that there are cases where, he gave the example, there was a middle manager that had ordered a strip search of a busload of kids. And he wants to see Bill C-20 having the ability where officers can make those complaints about their superiors, certainly when they impact the public or perhaps in your case and other officers. Can you just provide a bit of, and I got the sense that you share that perspective. Could you provide a bit more information on how Bill C-20 should be improved in that regard?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I'll try to answer that. What we've found over the years is that there is nowhere for the RCMP employees and personnel to go and report those types of things that are happening. And they created an independent center of harassment resolution as part of our lawsuit, but it's woefully underfunded and understaffed, and it deals with harassment. It doesn't deal with a lot of the other issues that are there. And yeah, for years they've, even in my case, they did a 2-year investigation of themselves and came back and said that nothing had happened, everything was unfounded. And then later on, 3,200 women came forward in our lawsuit, and I was the representative plaintiff after the RCMP said that everything was unfounded. So as long as you have that entity investigating themselves on internal misconduct and internal crimes that are happening, nothing is going to change because they investigate themselves, and unfounded seems to be the word that results. So it's just one thing after another, year after year, and we, like my partner here said, we still hear from women almost weekly that reach out to us for help and advice because they're just stuck in some level of hell within the RCMP with nowhere to go to make those complaints. And on the first day, Mr. Mendicino here, I saw the meeting, he said Bill C-20 was to give all Canadians an equal, fair, and respectful place to make these complaints. But if you don't include internal misconduct, what you're doing is basically you're leaving out all the employees and the volunteers, the public servants, the volunteers, all the people that work within the police force, support staff and members, still with nowhere really to go.
Thank you for that. Did you say 3,200 women came forward after your initial?
Yes.
Thank you very much for your bravery, ma'am. That's very inspiring, and certainly I would imagine, I can't speak for those women, that you really gave them courage and probably changed their lives. So thank you for that very much.
You have mentioned it being important not to have any non-disclosure agreements. You said that this would be very helpful. And there's also an economic issue embedded in that. You've pointed it out on your website, I believe, stating that hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayers are used to protect people who carry out crimes, harassment, misconduct within the RCMP and the CBSA, and nothing's been done to stop this. Imagine if those associations, those services had all that money to help prevent crime in communities. So I'm wondering how the non-disclosure agreement issue could be brought to bear on the current bill. I'd like to hear you further on this and how we can better protect victims.
one of the things that has made the problems in the RCMP so bad is that the people who have complained along the way and the settlements that they've had have rendered those people then voiceless. In order to settle their complaint, they are forced to sign off on these agreements. And part of the reason why we all got so sick and got to the point we did was because no one could talk about it. And I think if these non-disclosure, if people weren't if their voices weren't taken away in these non-disclosures and people could speak publicly, I think it would help them, their journey to get better after they've gone through these issues. So, yeah, I think there seems to be a groundswell of movement right now to deal with non-disclosure issues, as well as whistleblower legislation that needs to be, made better in Canada. We're one of the worst countries in the world for whistleblower protection laws. So those and non-disclosure agreements, I think they just need to go. They're something of the past. And in order to heal and move forward, everybody needs to be able to talk. It needs to be transparent. The whole process needs to be transparent. And in doing that, I think that's how you restore public faith, because 90 to 95% of the RCMP are good, honest, hardworking police officers, and it's just that potent minority that needs to be dealt with. But if everyone is rendered silent and forced to sign these agreements, we've seen it just continues.
A toxic workplace is so often a symptom of what can be a very toxic approach by an organization. In other words, we can't pull apart how the public may be treated in certain situations from what is happening internally. And you've spoken to that toxic workplace. Is that essentially your message, that we need to be, if we're taking a complaint process seriously, we need to make sure that the institution is functioning at the highest possible level and with respect both for police officers and for the public at all levels?
That is one of the most important things we've said. If you look at that an RCMP officer can assault another female RCMP officer or intimidate them or harass them in a way, how do you think they're behaving towards the general public? If they will do that internally, what are they doing externally? And that is what we're saying. You need to fix that toxic workplace where that is not acceptable. All people must be treated fair and equally before you're ever going to get the type of service you want in the communities if you don't deal with the bad actors internally. Unfortunately, those individuals go out and police your streets and try and keep the general public safe.
Thank you very much. And muzzling victims, which is what happens with non-disclosure agreements, is very much part of that. That keeps the toxic workplace hidden, sweeps it under the carpet. Is that not your point?
100%, because so many victims can't speak about what happened to them. They can't disclose that millions of dollars have gone missing in the RCMP, and the individuals responsible for that, nothing's ever happened to them. Unfortunately, the victim, when they come forward, they become the one who's considered the bad actor. They're the ones who have to retire, while the other individual continues along with a great career and nothing happens to them. And that's the problem. So the victims are always the ones who sign the non-disclosure agreements, and the perpetrators continue their career. Nothing happens to them, and that needs to change. And that's how getting rid of non-disclosure agreements, the victims can actually come out and say publicly what happened. If publicly these things come out, there will be an incredible outcry about what is actually going on, because lots of times we feel, people think we talk about conspiracy theories. If only they knew what really was going on in the organization, they would be horrified.
Thank you very much. I would like to move on.